This eerie tale tells of a poor woodcutter. Orphaned at a young age and possessing no particular skills, he was forced to eke out a living by chopping firewood, each day exchanging his haul for a meager sum to buy rice. One afternoon, after finishing his woodcutting, he was carrying his load down to the market to sell. As he neared the river, he saw a fisherman hauling a giant river clam. The river clam was as large as a cartwheel. Even for the fisherman, it was the first time he had ever seen one so enormous. Curious, the woodcutter set down his load of firewood and approached the fisherman to strike up a conversation, marveling that such a large clam could exist in the world, guessing it must have lived for 100 years. He felt that since the clam had lived for so long, it would be a pity to kill it for a mere snack with wine. It would be better to release it and accumulate some merit. The fisherman, of course, refused to let it go. He scoffed. "What merit is there in that? I caught no fish today, only this. If you want to accumulate merit, then buy it from me." Eventually, the two men agreed to trade the clam for the firewood. The woodcutter noticed a wound on the clam's shell, so he decided to take it home. Instead of releasing it immediately, he placed it in a large water jar behind his house. The clam, upon meeting the water, quickly swam to the bottom. But a moment later, it hesitantly rose to the surface, as if to express its gratitude to the woodcutter. Seeing this, he said, "Stay here and recover for a few days. I'll release you once your wound has healed." He was worried that if he released it immediately, the fisherman might catch it again. Having settled the clam, the woodcutter pushed open his door and went inside. He had no money to marry, so he lived alone. His house was simple, containing no valuable possessions. He had run out of rice, and the firewood he had chopped that day had been traded for the clam, so he had to go to bed hungry. The woodcutter lay down on his straw bed and, exhausted, closed his eyes. In his dream, he heard someone speaking, the sweet voice of a young woman. "Sir, wake up and eat." Hearing this, the woodcutter sat bolt upright. Before his bed indeed stood a beautiful young woman in her early 20s. He stammered, asking her name. The young woman gently explained that she was the giant clam he had rescued, transformed. She had come to express her gratitude for saving her life that day, thanks to which she had avoided the fate of becoming someone's meal. Then she conjured before the woodcutter a lavish spread of meat and wine. The young woman pulled him to the table, urging him to eat quickly before it grew cold. Seeing such a tray full of delicacies for the first time, the woodcutter, who was famished, dived in and ate heartily, continuously chewing and swallowing large bites. After he had eaten and drunk his fill, the young woman approached and embraced the woodcutter. She said she would repay his kindness by marrying him and becoming his wife. Naturally, he did not refuse. He felt this dream was so beautiful that he wished to remain immersed in it forever, never wanting to wake up. After a night of passion, as dawn broke, the woodcutter awoke, the sweet afterglow of that lingering dream still fresh in his mind. But as he turned his head, he saw that there was indeed a young woman sleeping beside him on the pillow. It was the same girl from the previous night, whom he had thought was merely part of his dream. The young woman did not hide her true nature, frankly telling him she was a spirit from the clam folk. Seeing his kind heart, she wished to marry him and live their days together. However, she said they could not continue to live in such poverty. She told him of a place by the riverbank, where a set of skeletal remains lay, with treasure beside it, and asked him to go find it and help gather the bones. Heeding her words, he went to the riverbank and, indeed, found a set of skeletal remains. It appeared to be the bones of someone who had drowned a very long time ago. Beside the skeletal remains was a chest full of gold coins. Following her instructions, he gave the bones a proper burial. Then he brought the money home, considering it a reward. Thanks to the chest of money, he was able to buy a fine, spacious house, and together with the young woman, he lived a life of wealth and comfort. However, after only a year or two, he found that life no longer held any excitement for him. He grew tired of eating the finest delicacies. Even drinking various exquisite wines brought him no satisfaction. His once beautiful wife, the one who had helped him achieve his current wealth, no longer seemed as pleasing to his eyes as before. Thus, he began to be captivated by the allure of other women's flirtations. He started frequenting brothels to seek pleasure. With his pockets full of money, he came to believe that a life of carnal pleasures, with a woman on each arm, was the only life worth living. He sank deeper and deeper into debauchery. He also developed a gambling habit, spending his days immersed in brothels and then moving on to gambling dens. It wasn't long before he lost everything. He then borrowed money to continue gambling. When his debt amounted to 100 taels of silver, his creditors began to pressure him for repayment. Threatened, he shamelessly suggested that he would offer his wife as collateral to settle the debt. Though he felt ashamed and regretful, to save his own skin, he still led the creditor to his home. He even confidently assured the creditor that his wife was no ordinary mortal and would undoubtedly have money. However, upon reaching his house, his eyes widened in disbelief. His wife was no longer there. The grand house had also vanished, and in its place stood only the dilapidated hut from his past. He was stunned, but deep down, he understood what had happened. The creditor, unable to collect the money and furious at being deceived, beat him relentlessly. Despite his pleas for mercy, one of his legs was broken in the assault. Thereafter, every day, he dragged himself along on his crippled leg, wandering by the riverbank, calling out his wife's name while weeping and repenting for all he had done. But he continued to drag himself along in this manner until the day he died, and his wife never appeared again. This strange tale tells of a scholar in a large city. One day, he was drinking wine and chatting with two of his fellow students. One of them, half jokingly, implied it was Wang's. The other friend in the group turned to treat everyone. But Wang said he was saving money because he needed it for something. The friend was startled, as if remembering something. He then asked if Wang needed the money to see the courtesan Liu Mei at the brothel. Wang pensively confirmed that this was true. Afterwards, he told them how a famously beautiful courtesan named Liu Mei had recently arrived at the brothel, whose beauty was said to be capable of overthrowing cities and nations. But it wasn't just a matter of having money to see her, as she chose her clients very carefully. To meet her even once, one had to pay at least 15 taels of silver. Although the price was by no means small, many people lined up every day to see her, causing the brothel to be constantly bustling with people. Hearing this, the friend said mockingly, "If that's the case, don't think that just by saving enough money, you'll catch her eye. How could you possibly compete with all those other men?" However, hearing Wang's account, he too became curious to see Liu Mei's appearance for himself, so he prepared a bag of money and went to the brothel. Our protagonist, the scholar, though not given to lust, also went along to see what kind of woman she was to captivate so many. When they arrived at the brothel, outside Liu Mei's room was already crowded with patrons. The three of them struggled to push their way to the front. Liu Mei stood in her room, looking out. The moment The scholar glanced at her. It was as if his very soul had been ensnared by her. Although Miss Liu Mei resided in a brothel, she was by no means common or vulgar, causing the scholar to be utterly smitten for many days after meeting her. Unable to restrain himself, he gathered all his money, but it was only a small amount. He then went and expressed his desire to meet her. The madam, of course, refused, but Liu Mei broke her own rule and agreed to meet him. Liu Mei was known to sell her artistry, not her body. The two of them discussed poetry and literature and found they had a profound mutual understanding. The scholar also taught her the 4 arts: Qin, Go, calligraphy, and painting. They proved to be perfectly compatible in mind and spirit. The young woman was moved by the scholar's talent as well as his kindness and gentleness, and secretly gave him her heart. But when he came to see her again, he was scolded and driven away by the madam, who told him not to hinder her business with his paltry sum. He wandered the streets in a melancholic mood, lamenting that he and the beautiful woman were fated to meet, but not to be together. Perhaps in this lifetime they would have no chance to be united. As he passed by a beggar sitting there, the beggar called out to him, asking for the silver the scholar was holding in his hand so he could have a full meal. The scholar gave a wry smile, thinking that if he couldn't meet the beautiful woman, the saved silver could at least help someone, so he gave it to the beggar. However, upon receiving the silver, the beggar did not use the money to buy food as he had said, but ran straight to the brothel. The madam, seeing his stench and filth, immediately scolded and tried to drive him away. He offered the silver to the madam, begging only to see Liu Mei once. Seeing the money, she reluctantly agreed, but only allowed him a single glance at Liu Mei. As soon as the beggar saw Liu Mei, he exclaimed in admiration, "Truly, her reputation is well deserved, a beauty that could overthrow nations." He stepped in front of her and unexpectedly reached out and touched her face. The madam shrieked, "Get your filthy hands off her!" and immediately threw him out. Dark fingerprints were clearly imprinted on Liu Mei's face. The madam, though fuming with anger, quickly took a cloth to wipe her face. However, the stain could not be wiped off. Moreover, even with thorough washing, not only could it not be cleaned, but the more it was washed, the wider and darker the black mark spread. No one wanted to see her anymore, so the madam had no choice but to send her to the kitchen to do chores, making her a servant in the brothel. Upon hearing this news, the scholar sold all his possessions, gathered what little silver he could, and went to the madam to ask to buy the girl's freedom. Seeing that she was now ugly and worthless, and that some money was better than none, the madam agreed. Afterwards, the scholar organized a wedding ceremony and properly took her as his wife, amidst everyone's blessings. On their wedding night, when they were alone, she anxiously asked if he found her current ugly appearance repulsive, but he simply smiled and said that in his eyes, she was no different than before. His fellow students mocked him again, saying that Liu Mei was now incredibly ugly, yet he could still be by her side day and night. But he calmly replied that her talents remained intact, and in his eyes she was no different than before. Thanks to Liu Mei's capable and thorough management of the household, their family's fortune steadily improved, and they also had a plump baby boy. One day, a beggar came to their door. She instructed someone to give him some food and also told them to bring some of her husband's old clothes for him. The beggar looked up, saying, "Let me see what a wife with such a kind heart looks like." It was the same beggar who had left the stain on Liu Mei's face years ago. He recognized her and asked if she resented him for causing her to look this way. But she said she bore no resentment and even thanked the miraculous beggar because it was thanks to him that she was able to marry the man she loved and live a peaceful life. The beggar saw fish in the garden pond and exclaimed that he loved to eat fish. Without waiting for the homeowner's permission, he rushed forward to catch one. However, he didn't catch any fish but instead dipped his hands in the water. Then he wiped Liu Mei's face with his wet hands, saying it was time to clean her face. After the beggar finished washing her face, he left immediately, leaving her standing there stunned. However, her appearance made the young servant girl cry out with joy. The stain on her face had vanished without a trace, and she had returned to her former nation-toppling beauty. When the scholar heard the news, he hurried back. But when he ran outside to look for the beggar, he was nowhere to be seen. Afterwards, the scholar never took another concubine, having only Liu Mei as his wife for his entire life. Their love story was celebrated by people as a beautiful legend. This airy tale tells of a merchant who spent his years conducting business away from home. After many days away working, upon receiving news that his wife had given birth, he hurriedly returned home. As soon as he arrived, without even taking time to put away his belongings, he rushed into the delivery room, anxious to see if the baby was a boy or a girl. His wife had successfully given birth. Both mother and child were well. The baby was a healthy boy. The merchant was overjoyed. Finally, the family had a son to carry on the family line. The couple had been childless for many years and had often prayed for a child at the temple. Now that their wish had been granted, they decided they would go to give thanks the next day. The merchant had saved up several silver ingots over a long time, intending to exchange them for a gold statue as an offering to the Bodhisattva. He usually hid the silver under his pillow in the bedroom. That night, before going to sleep, as usual, he reached under his pillow to check. However, he was stunned to realize the silver was gone. He shot up, frantically searching all over the bed. He had struggled and saved for many years to acquire it. Seeing her husband in such a panic, his wife worriedly guessed that he might have put it somewhere else and forgotten. However, the merchant insisted he had hidden the silver only in that spot. After rummaging everywhere without finding it, the merchant suspiciously asked his wife if anyone had ever lain on his pillow. His wife recalled that on the day she gave birth, the midwife had stayed overnight to care for her and the baby, and might have lain on that pillow. He immediately suspected that the midwife had taken the opportunity to steal the money. The merchant decided he would go to her house early the next morning to demand it back. That night, the couple tossed and turned, unable to sleep. As soon as dawn broke, he rushed off to the midwife's house. Seeing the door open, he called out loudly for her. The midwife, hearing someone calling for her, stepped out from inside her house. As soon as he saw her, the merchant rushed forward, holding out his hand and demanding the return of the lost silver. The midwife, of course, denied stealing anything. The two began to argue. The midwife pointed out that she had diligently cared for his wife and child, not daring to leave their side for a moment. Instead of being grateful, he was falsely accusing her. After a while, the argument grew louder and the words became increasingly harsh. The merchant impulsively cursed the midwife, saying that if she didn't confess and return the silver, she would be struck dead by lightning. The midwife, not one to back down, angrily berated him for his malicious words and then cursed his newborn son, saying retribution would befall him and he would die young. After a fierce argument, partly because the midwife stubbornly refused to admit anything, and partly because there was no concrete evidence, the merchant returned home in a rage. A few days later, the wife, seeing her husband's rude behavior and wanting to smooth over the relationship between the two families, invited the midwife's daughter to their home to help bathe the child. After the task was completed, the midwife's daughter left. However, the baby suddenly began to cry inconsolably. No matter how the mother tried to soothe him, the baby would not stop crying. Instead, he cried louder and louder. The merchant thought he might be unwell and was about to go out to find a physician to examine him. But before he could even leave the house, the baby's eyes rolled back and he passed away. The mother, distraught, shook and called out to her child, but it was too late. The child had died amidst the agonizing cries of his parents. They buried their son in the garden behind the house. The loss of their child cast an indescribable gloom over the home that had just recently been filled with happiness. Devoid of all strength, the grieving couple lay in their house. That night, a heavy rain began to fall. A fierce wind howled, and thunder and lightning crashed ceaselessly. Their hearts were filled with sorrow, and they could not sleep. Outside, the thunder roared, and the wife, tears streaming down her face, whispered, "Perhaps heaven itself sees the injustice of our child's death, and that is why it weeps so." But the merchant felt something was amiss. He sensed something was not right. The sound of the lightning seemed as if it were striking directly down into their back garden. To ascertain what was happening, despite the raging storm and crashing thunder, he ran to the window and threw it open to look out at the backyard. The horrifying sight before them left both husband and wife stunned. Right on the patch of ground where they had buried their son, two women were kneeling prostrate, and they seemed to be clutching something in their hands. Looking closer, they saw it was the midwife and her daughter holding the silver the merchant had lost. Both had been struck dead by lightning. The baby's small grave had also been struck by lightning. A tiny hand protruded from the earth, accompanied by the sound of a baby crying. The couple rushed over to see. The husband and wife hastily picked up their child, tears of joy streaming down their faces. The child, who had been dead, was suddenly alive again. A silver needle protruded from below his navel. It was the very needle that the midwife's daughter had stuck into the baby's abdomen while bathing him earlier. The mother and daughter, driven by greed to harm others, had ultimately faced heaven's punishment. This bizarre tale concerns an incredibly wealthy magnate. When his daughter turned 18, he recruited a young man to be his live-in son-in-law. On the wedding day, gongs and drums resounded, and the ceremony was exceptionally grand. This was a noteworthy event for most people in the region. Everyone marveled, admiring the son-in-law's good fortune to be wed to the daughter of such a wealthy family. Hearing the buzzing discussions, a radiant smile graced the son-in-law's lips. Marrying this family's young lady had likely cost him considerable effort. To prepare for this marriage, the magnate's family spared no expense, renovating the entire mansion and adorning it lavishly for the joyous occasion, with festive lanterns and flowers hung from inside out. The groom proceeded into the main hall, where the bride's family had fully assembled. The bride wore a red veil concealing her face. The new husband and wife prepared to perform the wedding ceremony according to proper rites. Despite the bride's family's grand and solemn preparations, the live-in son-in-law maintained his radiant smile. During the ceremony, he appeared cheerful and normal. But in the very next instant, a cold sweat broke out, drenching his collar. His face flushed red, as if someone were strangling him, making it impossible for him to breathe. Immediately thereafter, he collapsed to the ground, unconscious. Someone cried out in panic, "Heavens! What's happened?" Then they urged people to quickly summon a physician. The son-in-law remained unconscious for 3 days. The family invited the most renowned physician in the region to prescribe medicine, but there was no improvement. It wasn't until the 4th day that he slowly regained consciousness. The moment he opened his eyes, he saw a tiny figure, about a foot tall, dart under a low table. As soon as the tiny figure vanished, the son-in-law fully recovered. He sat up as if nothing had occurred. Seeing this, the bride was overjoyed that her husband had finally awakened. It seemed everything had returned to normal. But the strange illness would recur every few days, causing everyone great worry. Each time he experienced suffocation, the son-in-law felt as if a tiny person behind him was tightening a rope around his neck. Suspecting he was being harmed by some demonic force, the physician was at a loss. The family then invited a Taoist priest to perform an exorcism. The Taoist priest placed an exorcism sword at the head of the bed and a basin of clear water under the wooden table where the diminutive figure usually disappeared. He instructed the son-in-law that if he saw the tiny person upon waking, he should act immediately. And just as before, when he was vaguely regaining consciousness, he saw the familiar small figure. The son-in-law instantly sat up, swiftly drew the pre-placed sword, and slashed directly at the tiny figure, severely wounding it. It fled in panic towards the space under the table. However, it was blocked by the basin of water placed there earlier. With no other choice, it climbed into it. Hearing the sound, they knew it had fallen directly into the basin of water. This was followed by a few sounds like air bubbles, and after a short while there was no further movement. When all was quiet, the son-in-law pulled out the basin of water to inspect it. Inside, a small wooden effigy severed in two floated on the surface. He retrieved the wooden effigy from the basin and saw that its 2 hands were bound together by a red thread. At this point, the Taoist priest was summoned again. He explained that the wooden effigy was a form of malevolent magic, a suppression hex, Yam Thung, cast by the carpenter, with the intent to strangle the son-in-law to death. The Taoist priest stated that merely burning the effigy with fire could break the spell. However, if the spell were broken, the caster would surely die an unnatural death. The magnate was furious that he had nearly killed his son-in-law. He deserved to die. He then ordered the effigy to be burned. A servant took the effigy and burned it to ashes. After its destruction, the son-in-law no longer exhibited any strange symptoms. The next day, a servant came to inform the magnate that a carpenter who had renovated the mansion before the wedding had died suddenly. So it was him, the magnate recalled. Indeed, while working, that carpenter had once pleaded with him for a favor. He had said his elderly mother was gravely ill and needed money for treatment, begging the magnate for an advance payment of a few days' wages. But because the renovations kept him busy with many trivial matters at the time, he had paid no heed to the request. From then until the project was completed, the carpenter never returned to ask again, so the magnate had assumed the man had overcome his difficulties. The madam, upon learning the story, also expressed sympathy for him, but for him to resort to such a wicked method for revenge, it was considered that he had brought retribution upon himself. This strange tale is about a young scholar. Needing a quiet place to immerse himself in his studies for an upcoming examination, he chose an ancient mountain temple to reside in. Within the temple, there was a very large and flourishing flower garden. Every day, he would be here, composing poems and prose. Thanks to this, he felt his literary works became more imbued with sentiment. In the garden, a white peony particularly caught his attention because it seemed to bloom more radiantly and splendidly than any other flower. Strangely, whenever he recited poetry, that flower would sway in the breeze as if dancing in perfect harmony with his every chanted word. One night, the scholar read until late. After a while, engrossed in turning the pages of his books, he fell asleep without realizing it. While half awake and half asleep, he vaguely felt someone draping a cloak over him. He opened his eyes and indeed saw a young woman dressed in white. The white-robed maiden, seeing him awaken, shyly turned to leave, but it was too late. He grasped her hand and held her back. When questioned, she said she had been abducted by the Taoist priest in the temple and imprisoned there. It was out of admiration for his talent that she had dared to come and meet him. The scholar was surprised, never imagining such a thing could happen, and said he would immediately rescue her. However, the maiden refused, saying that being brought here by the Taoist priest was also a karmic connection that allowed them to meet. The white-robed maiden possessed an exquisite beauty that stirred the scholar's heart, and he fell deeply in love with her. From then on, the two met frequently, eventually becoming intimate lovers. Every day, he would recite poetry, and the girl would sing and dance along, creating a romantic scene like a pair of devoted lovebirds. It was just that they only spent time together each day after night had fallen. Every time dawn approached, the girl would hastily depart, much to the scholar's reluctance to see her go. One day, he encountered the Taoist priest in the temple. The priest remarked that his complexion did not look well and asked if something had happened. However, he did not reply, merely looking at the Taoist priest with eyes full of resentment. The Taoist priest feared that he had been bewitched by a demon. Noticing a faint demonic aura about the scholar, and knowing that flower demons often cause trouble in this courtyard, he warned the scholar to be careful and protect himself. That evening, the girl came to find him again. The scholar angrily told her that today the Taoist priest had falsely accused him of having a demonic aura. But this time, the girl had come to say goodbye, saying that after this night, she feared they would not be able to meet again. The girl's words filled the scholar with extreme anxiety. That night, fearing she would leave, he held her tightly in his arms. When she was sound asleep, he stealthily used a red silk ribbon to tie their ankles together. Having done this, he finally felt at ease and dozed off. However, the next morning, the girl had vanished as usual, leaving him feeling dejected, looking around for her. He stepped outside to look for her and encountered the Taoist priest again, who warned that his complexion was growing increasingly grim and that if he did not leave the temple soon, he feared his life would be difficult to preserve. But he refused to listen, calling the girl's name while pushing the Taoist priest aside, determined not to leave. The scholar entered the flower garden and saw the red silk ribbon he had used to tie the girl the previous night now tied around the base of the white peony. Only then did he understand that she was the white peony spirit. But instead of being frightened, he rejoiced, exclaiming that the girl was a flower fairy, meaning she was always by his side every day. Just then, a group of fierce-looking men unexpectedly burst into the temple, startling him as he did not know who they were. It turned out that a wealthy household in the city had heard of a 100-year-old white peony in the temple and had sent men to dig it up and bring it back to plant in their garden. The scholar immediately stepped forward to stop them, preferring death rather than allowing them to touch the peony, because he knew it was the girl he loved. But the group of men did not listen. After loudly ordering him to step aside and failing, they struck him, sending him tumbling to the ground. An iron spade hit his head, causing blood to flow profusely. The scholar thus lost his life, and the white peony was also dug up and taken away. However, after the peony was brought to the wealthy man's garden, it soon withered and died. In the temple, at the spot where the young man had fallen, and also where the flower had been uprooted, 2 new shoots sprouted from the hole in the ground. The 2 plants grew entwined around each other, blooming with 1 white flower and 1 green flower. People said it was the scholar's soul that had transformed into the flower to be with the one he loved.